name is Lisa Heywood, and I'd like to welcome you to Callers Chat, an online space which I have created for callers to come together and chat about all things calling. Today, I'd like to welcome not one, but two excellent people to our stage. Janet Bell has been dancing since she was old enough to walk, and has continued to do so since she swapped her dancing shoes for dancing wheels. Katherine Last is an outspoken autistic wheelchair user who's passionate about access and inclusion, and can also be found on many a dance floor. They've come to talk to us today about, and I'm loving this pun, wheelie good access. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Janet and Katherine.
I'm Janet. I've been ceilidh dancing since pretty much I could walk, and then when I couldn't walk, I was still ceilidh dancing. And yeah, so it's been 17 years of ceilidh dancing in wheelchairs. I first used manual wheelchairs, and now I mainly dance in an electric wheelchair. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Kat. So, like Janet, been ceilidh dancing pretty much my entire life. Started dancing in a chair in about 2007, and I used a manual chair, and I've got a very good quality chair, which makes a huge difference to dancing. I could not dance anywhere near as much with a chair that was not as lightweight and maneuverable. Yeah, I think that's it.
Cool. Okay. So before we talk specifically about how to do wheelchair dancing, we wanted to cover a little bit first about the medical model and the social model of disability, because it does, I promise, feed into what we're talking about. So this is just like a 101 on it. So the medical model is what has been prevailing and still in a lot of circles does. It is the idea that essentially disability is something that exists because of the impairments that we have, and needs to be reduced as much as possible through operations or medication. In that model, the problem, as it were, of disability therefore falls mostly on the individual. The social model of disability is what has been kind of building traction since about the 80s, is when it was first turned up. And the social model of disability says that disability is what happens to somebody who has impairments, and what it happens because society has failed to provide enough adaptations.
So, for example, for the medical model says, I can't access that place because I'm in a wheelchair. The social model of disability says, I can't access that place because they haven't provided a ramp or a lift. If the ramp or the lift is provided, I can then access the venue, and therefore I am not disabled.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. So in my day-to-day life, I face very few barriers because my house is adapted, my work is adapted, and I get there through 2 accessible train stations. It's easy. There isn't much in my day-to-day life that I think, this is a problem that I can't do because I'm disabled. There are obviously criticisms of both models, but for now, we're going to be sticking with the social model of disability, ideally, because that is where both of us, I think that we would say that that's where our views tend to most align.
And also sort of how you kind of want to be framing your thinking going forward when you're prepping for future events where there may or may not be wheelchair users.
Yeah, excellent point. Okay, so this feeds in hugely into our terminology. So disabled is not a bad word. Disabled is the word that we should be using. I can't tell you how much I hate it when people say I am differently abled. Differently abled for me makes me feel like I should be able to fly. I can't fly. I just can't walk very well. It's fine. so it's not, disabled is not a neither a positive or negative term. It's an entirely neutral word, and we shouldn't be afraid to use it. Though some disabled people will have a word for themselves that they like. If they are fine with differently abled or one of the other ones, that's fine. Use that for them, but use disabled people as the general term for everybody.
And it's that a lot of the terms like differently abled, handicapable, etc. They seem nice and cutesy, but it's just a way for non-disabled people to kind of avoid using the word disabled and just kind of tiptoe around things and to kind of wrap themselves in cotton wool. And actually, by using that sort of language, it really reinforces and exacerbates the notion that disabled is a dirty word.
Yeah, thank you. And so going from that, one word that makes me laugh every time I see it is wheelchair bound. The only time someone is wheelchair bound is probably when they're tied to their wheelchair, and I really don't need to know what people are doing in their spare time. Like, it's not a useful conversation for me to be part of. Thank you. And yeah, so we need to be using the term wheelchair user because they're not assuming anything about the person who's using a wheelchair other than they are literally sitting in a wheelchair.
And it's also worth noting wheelchair bound tends to have historically been associated with people who can't stand or walk at all. And actually, it's been hard to find an exact statistic on how many wheelchair users can stand and walk a bit or who have varied ability to walk, because it's just I've come across a few different ones, but they're so wildly variable. I can't give you a
somewhere between 30 and 80% of wheelchair users can walk short distances at least.
So if you're using terms like wheelchair bound, that kind of reinforces that all wheelchair users can't stand and walk, and actually that then ends up inadvertently excluding those of us who can stand and walk a bit.
Yeah. And also with terminology, we've written the word accessible here, and that is because if you call a toilet a disabled toilet, that means it's broken. It means it's out of order. It's not what it is, and it's an accessible toilet. And especially if you are using the word disabled toilet around people whose first language isn't necessarily English, they might get not necessarily very helpful for them.
They might say, oh, that's a disabled toilet. Oh, well, then it can't be used because it's broken.
Yeah. Okay. Kat.
So, some do's and don'ts about interacting with us. Please talk to us, not our companion. The number of times pretty much every wheelchair user I know, myself included, has been somewhere where we're there, we're with someone, and the person who's interacting with us has only spoken to the person we're with and not to us. Talk to us. We are perfectly capable of interacting, and just talk to us like you would anyone else. If someone makes it clear that they need you to change how you communicate with them, that's a different matter, and you should be open to changing that. I would say, when you're standing, think about heights, and because the height difference can be a massive thing. So for myself, pun unintended, for myself, when I'm sat down and I'm talking to one of my friends who's about 6'5", he will always sit down to come down to my height, because otherwise I'm going to get neck ache really quickly. It's always a good idea to check with the wheelchair user what they would prefer. Some people would actually prefer your standing. Particularly, I've had conversations where I'd actually prefer the person was standing because they're blocking out the sun. That means so I can actually see them if they're standing. When you are talking to us, first of all, don't assume that we have a carer, because quite a lot of us are quite happy to go out and about, do our own thing on our own. And also, never assume that if we do, so if we've got someone with us, don't assume that that person is our carer, because the number of times I've had my fiance referred to as my carer, it's like, well, he's actually my fiance, and then people can get quite shocked that someone like me can have a fiance. That goes down all kinds of conversation routes I don't really want to be having with people. Really important, don't talk over our head or talk over us. Like, just talk to us. Absolutely essential. Please do not ever touch our wheelchairs without permission. If you were to put your hand on a standing able person's backside, they wouldn't appreciate it. It's basically the same as that. And also, you never know that if you're touching someone's chair, you might actually be causing them pain. I've had quite often people just resting their hand on my wheelchair, but actually they've inadvertently been pushing down a bit, and I've come very close to being tipped out backwards. And it's always really...
You also might be damaging the chair. So I've had people leaning on the back of my chair, but the back of my chair is articulated. So if you lean on it, you're damaging the mechanism.
Yeah, generally just do not touch chairs without permission. Don't baby talk us, and don't assume anything. And the big thing is, if you do mess up, because we're all human, we're going to get it wrong sometimes. Just own up.
Sorry. Sorry, my fault.
That's all right. If you do get it wrong, be accountable. Just own up, say, I'm really sorry. Don't try to go into long, lengthy explanations, because that comes across as really defensive and kind of not really accepting, admitting that you've got it wrong. Just apologise, adjust, move on.
Yeah. Okay. So, venue accessibility. This you can't really have a ceilidh with wheelchair users if they can't get into the building or into your venue. So, this starts before you get to the venue. When you're advertising your ceilidh, if you are able to, if you have any control over the copy that you're putting out, include accessibility information as standard. That can just be that this venue is step free. It has to be, that's 4 words. It doesn't need to go into massive detail as the information that you're putting out, but just showing that someone has actually thought about the access is a huge step forward, because it takes so long to look up all the access, which goes into point 2, is have a single point of access for inquiries. If I'm making an access inquiry and then I have to go and speak to 4 different people because they've then passed me around from pillar to post, because actually no one knows what the doorway widths are or whatever, that shouldn't be a job that falls on me. I should speak to one person, and if they don't know the answer, they need to go find out the answer, rather than making that my job. Ramps, obviously really important. Having a wide enough ramp, long enough ramp. Ramps are actually only meant to be at most 1 in 9, which is really quite flat. So they probably need to be longer than you think, but also really please make them stable. I've had some really horrible ramps. You can get some fantastic travel ramps on eBay. They're not expensive. Yeah, but they aren't everything. Make sure though that we do want to get into the building and we would like to go and do some dancing, but most of us are probably going to want to go to the bar and probably the toilet, and also escape in a fire. So if you have somewhere that you're doing a ceilidh, please try and make sure that at least those 3 are accessible. I mean, I'd say the most important one was the bar, but that is me. Kat is shaking her head.
For me, part of my disability, I'm quite upfront about this. I have bladder and bowel issues as part of my disability, so
yeah,
needing to access the loo is absolutely essential. If a venue does not have an accessible toilet, I'm not going.
Yeah, I was being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but
yeah, I
know. Yeah, usually if you can get into a building, that means 1 exit, 1 fire escape is available, but yeah, always good to make sure. Okay, doorways, which so many times I go to a venue and they've got these lovely wide double doors, only one of them is open. Make sure that that is dealt with, and that if you're expecting a wheelchair user to be able to go through double doors, make sure both of them are open. It's infuriating. The other thing is to consider flooring. So
Do I come in
But
there?
for the people who were at Sidmouth or thinking about Sidmouth this year, then you'll know how much of an issue flooring at the Bulverton was. And then the people who were there, you might have seen me trying to get over the bloody rattan stuff on the grass in yeah, both of us. We were just, it was evil. It's absolutely horrible. And yeah, there's absolutely no way that you could do a ceilidh on something like that. But it's not just that, does the floor slope, and particularly if you're doing an outside ceilidh, doesn't make so much difference to the dancing if you're on feet, but it does make a lot of difference to the dancing if you're on wheels, because you will drop down even more than you would if you were on feet. Yeah. We got anything else on accessibility needs for building, Kat?
I'm just thinking on the flooring things, like particularly for things like weddings, which they'll often be a marquee. And a few years ago, I went to a couple of my friends. I went to their wedding, and they're like, "We're having a ceilidh, you'll love it." And they had the rattan flooring, and I was like, "I can't dance on this." So it's always worth bearing in mind, particularly because ceilidhs are really popular at weddings at the moment. It's always worth having a conversation, and I really, really implore you to have a conversation with the bride and groom, or the brides or the grooms, and check with them, what's the flooring like, and have a conversation with them, like, is there anyone coming who's a wheelchair user? If so, really make sure you get the right flooring in, because if you have the wrong flooring, they might not have a clue, and if particularly someone who's never ceilidh danced before, they might not know what to look for. So it's very much a two-way conversation with the hosts and yourself.
Yeah. Okay, so specifics of dancing with a wheelchair. And the first point is it varies. There are thousands and thousands of different reasons why you might be in a wheelchair, and for each of those you might need to dance in a very slightly different ways. Yeah, something that I find that is different to Cat is that Cat can be spun at any speed that you can get the wheelchair round at, essentially, and whereas me, you're slightly more limited by how fast my motors go.
And also, if you try to swing the way I swing, your shoulders will pop out.
That is very true. Yes.
Mine won't.
Well, fine. Yes, that too. Right. Cat.
So I'm going to do this part because I'm a manual chair user. So different chair users are going to need different levels of help. Like, I'm experienced, I know what I'm doing. Someone who's new to it might not be so sure. So it may well be in your place as a caller, if you're aware that the person is new to it and they're not quite sure how to do it, or maybe you can step in, just offer some tips, say, I know wheelchair dancers and this is what they suggest. So for a swing or a turn, quite often you want to have a firm arm, and again, same sort of grasp often with the turn, hand on the elbow, not with the thumb pressing into the elbow. Again, no limp arms. I mean, everyone who dances standing finds that if you get a limp arm, it's really difficult to dance with for the physics of things. But these things massively vary depending on the individual's strength and ability. So some people might need a bit more. Generally, still touching the wheelchair is still absolutely not without permission, but there will be occasions when actually you need a little bit of a hand. So for me, when I do chain across, because it's quite a sharp maneuver, quite a small maneuver, particularly if the ceilidh is quite packed, I will often ask people to just put their hand on the chair just to keep it nice and tight, turn it round so my partner's not going forwards and I'm going off at a 45-degree angle into the middle of another set. Something like this, it's always worth having a word with the wheelchair user beforehand. Again, like Janet said, with the point of contact beforehand, giving people an opportunity to get in touch beforehand and say, these are my access needs, makes a huge difference. And for myself, I'm quite confident about going up to a caller and saying, actually, by the way, could you just announce it at the start that when you're dancing with this person in the wheelchair, please make sure you do this, that, and the other. Some people might not be comfortable with that. But if you do see a wheelchair user at the ceilidh before the start of the ceilidh, it's always worth trying to make time to just have a quick word with them, check what they want from you, how you can help, also what they don't want, because some people might be a bit more, actually, no, I don't want it being announced to the entire room. I prefer it because when you're trying to do it, particularly if you've got like a long way to progressive and you've got about 20 pairs in your set, you can't trying to shout it across the set each time, however many times, you just can't, because you can't hear.
Yeah, I think we've got a little bit more about that on another slide.
Yeah.
So specifics of dancing with an electric wheelchair. So one thing is absolutely paramount is never ever touch the controller or the controlling hand. The amount of times that I've had people say going to reach for my right hand when we're doing a right hand turn, something like that, my right hand is busy. My right hand is trying to make sure I don't run anyone over, and that means it needs to stay absolutely untouched by anybody else. It is incredibly dangerous. I mean, that not just ceilidhs, just don't ever touch someone's controlling hand. But because I'm controlling with my right hand, almost always I prefer to swing with my left. Which will confuse people sometimes, and other things that if I can do something going the other way round with the left arm instead, then I sometimes do, depending on how it fits with the dance. Electric wheelchair users particularly will find it really difficult to swing because so my wheelchair is specifically set up for dancing. I have it programmed specifically so that I've got much more acceleration and deceleration and all of the things, absolutely, so that I can dance. But most people won't have that because that's weird. No one has that. So trying to get an electric wheelchair to turn quickly enough to swing will need is not really necessarily going to happen. So if you're able to offer to suggest alternatives to everybody in the room, not just the wheelchair users, but to say, well, this is where you swing, or you do the the Macarena, or whatever. It's one, it kind of adds a little bit of jollity to the dance anyway, I think, but it gives people an excuse to not try and swing. It gives people permission to not have to try to do something that's actually quite difficult. What else is my last point? Again, similar to Katherine, like experienced dancers will have their own way of doing things, which is great. But also on the flip side, people who aren't used to doing things will not know. If you're able to do an extra walkthrough, if someone has not danced before, that is probably incredibly useful.
So it's always worth keeping an eye on the sets during the walkthrough, because sometimes we might not be able to grab everyone in the set, or particularly if it's stuff like great long ways. One thing that is incredibly important is if you are able to, if there is enough space, please make sure to ask the sets to move around so that the sets with wheelchairs have more space, because otherwise we're going to be running into people. It is paramount, even at the busiest ceilidhs, you want to squish up people who are walking so that wheelchair users have more space. Because people on their feet can squish down more and take up less space. We don't have that option.
It's just going to get dangerous otherwise, especially if you've got people who aren't experienced or aren't necessarily quite as aware of what's going on, which some wheelchair users might not be. So I know I've color coded this as UCAT, but so you already mentioned some of it. If you're able to talk to us before the dancing begins, so that could be at the single point of contact access email, or it could be you're at a ceilidh, you've seen that there's a wheelchair user. If a caller just comes over to me and says, "Hi, is there anything you want me to warn you about?" Because I absolutely can't do ladies' chains, cannot do that. Then yeah, I mean, some of you have called for Kaylee's where you've done that and been like, "Yeah, Janet, you don't want to do this one."
Often
That's great.
find for Gay Gordon's because of that, partly because of the cross shoulder hold, but also because you're doing the 4 steps forward and then you've got to turn and continue going in the same direction but going backwards. You can't really do that in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
Even
No, never in that situation say, I never want someone else's opinion on it. I never want, even though you know what you're doing, and your callers, I never want, I think you should sit this one out.
It should be much
tell
more.
me what's in the dance, or not tell me your opinion on whether you think I'll be able to do it. Because if you tell me I'm not going to be able to do it, then I'm going to try harder, and it's going to go well.
So there are certain figures you want to give people a heads up.
Yeah.
But also,
then, like, sometimes you might want to give people a heads up, like, if there's things like baskets anyway. It's just, yeah, giving people more of an idea about what you might be calling before they decide whether or not they're going to take part in that dance. Yeah, and anything specifically. But then people who have danced before won't know that they need to avoid baskets. So, yeah, if you can chat with people about it, that's great.